Hanukkah is not in the Old Testament. That may surprise you. It's a Jewish festival, but you can look from Genesis through Malachi and you won't find it. Why is that? Because the story behind Hanukkah happened after the time of the Old Testament, but before the time of Jesus. About 160 years before Jesus was born, we have the story of Hanukkah. And we do find Hanukkah, however, and this is what you might say is a great irony, in the New Testament. Remember, I read it to you a little while ago in John chapter 10, verse 22, the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Hanukkah. Jesus went to the temple at the time of Hanukkah. Now, the story of Hanukkah is the story of the Maccabees, and I'm just going to give you the very shortest version of it. They tried to wipe us out by making us not be Jews anymore. They failed. Let's eat. You remember Antiochus, the evil Syrian Greek king? He and some Jewish traders, including the high priest, they wanted to get rid of all these Jewish distinctives. No more circumcision for the boys. No more Torah scrolls. That temple, it shouldn't have an empty Holy of Holies. Actually, there should be a statue of Zeus inside the Holy of Holies of God's temple. And how come all the other people sacrifice pigs, but the Jews only sacrifice sheep, goats, and bulls, and turtle doves? I mean, the Jews should just get with it and sacrifice pigs like the Greeks do. And therefore, all of these things were decreed. And the very leaders of the Jewish people went along with this. I don't want to gross anybody out, but Jewish men wanted to participate in the Greek games, which were always nude. And this was a problem because Jewish men felt that they weren't quite adequate because of their circumcision. And there actually at this time were men who reversed their circumcision with the poor technology of the day. I don't even want to think about it or imagine it. But it's a true story. Jews didn't want to be Jews anymore. It was a time when everybody wanted to be Greek. The triumph of Alexander years before had been passed down through his generals, and now it was time for the whole world to be Greek. But then one day they came to a village called Modi'in. Today, if you're in Israel, Modi'in is one of your last stops on the way to the airport if you're coming from Jerusalem. You still pass through Modi'in today on your way to the Tel Aviv airport. They came to this little town of Modi'in and they said, "Here, we brought a pig and a statue of Zeus, sacrifice." And an elderly man named Mattathias took out his knife and he went up to the village elder who was going to comply, who was going to compromise, and he killed him. And his sons came up and joined him, and they had their knives and their swords, and they said, "Whoever is for God, come and join our band." And they engaged in a series of battles with the Syrian Greeks that went on for about a decade. And time after time, it was the Jews who beat the professional mercenary armies hired by the Syrian Greeks, who beat them sometimes with farm tools and with no armor and no cavalry, no horses. And they kept winning and they kept winning. And it happened in about the year 165, they actually took the temple back. And when they got to the temple, they found a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. They found ashes and bones of pigs on God's altar. And they began to clean it all and replace some of the stones that were defiled, and they began to cleanse things. And then they got down to where it was time to start the temple worship again. And one of the things you had to do in the temple was to light the menorah. Now, the menorah in the temple was about 6 feet tall, and it didn't have 9 branches like the one I have here. It had 7 branches. This is a Hanukkah menorah. It's a little different. But you had to use olive oil, and it had to be consecrated oil. And they could only find 1 casket of oil, which was generally enough for 1 day. But to have new, properly consecrated oil would take 8 days. But they were so zealous for God, they didn't want to wait 8 days to start the worship again. So they just went on ahead and lit the menorah and hoped it would all work out. And according to a legend, that 1 container of oil, it burned for 8 days. And so we celebrate Hanukkah every year for 8 days. We light the menorah on the first night. By the way, why 9? Well, there are 8 days of Hanukkah, plus you have 1 candle that's the servant. It lights all the others. And so on the first night, we light 1 candle plus 1, and then 1 candle plus 2 on the second night, and it grows, and you get more light as each night of Hanukkah comes. Can anybody figure out how many candles you need to get through the week? A good math problem, right? I think the correct answer is 44. Fortunately, all boxes of Hanukkah candles come with the right number of candles to get you through the whole week. And we play a game called dreidel. It's a religious gambling game. We usually gamble with Hershey's Kisses, and stuff like that. But on the menorah, on the dreidel, it has some Hebrew letters, and they stand for a Hebrew sentence. Nes gadol hayasham. A great miracle happened there. The miracle is that the Jewish people almost came to an end. It wasn't like the Holocaust. They weren't going to be put into ovens. They weren't going to be put into gas showers. That's not how the Jewish people were going to end. You don't have to kill the Jews to bring the Jews to an end. All you have to do is get Jews to quit being Jews. Don't circumcise your sons. Don't read the commandments that God gave you and keep them. Don't keep the Sabbath. Just worship, like everybody else does. You don't have to have your special prayers, and you don't have to do all these different things. Why don't you just be like everybody else? And you know what? As soon as that happens, there's no Jewish people anymore. And God said, as long as there's a sun and stars and a moon, my people will never disappear. Jeremiah 34. But 160 years before Jesus was born, the Jewish people came this close to being wiped out, not by war, but by assimilation. And so I really mean it when I tell you this. If there had not been a Hanukkah, there could never have been a Christmas. What people would Messiah have been born to if the Jewish people had disappeared 160 years before he was born?